story. Do you guys like stories?
Yep.
Fantastic, then I'm in the right place. The story this evening is about immense grit, courage, passion and purpose. Meticulous planning and preparation, about believing in yourself and literally putting everything on the line for what you believe in and then going the distance no matter what, no matter the odds stacked against you. It's a story of fighting for your life in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, alone, unassisted, unsupported, on a modified stand-up paddleboard through the fiercest of storms, the wildest of elements, the darkest of days, and the most terrifying, never-ending nights for over 93 days.
That's unbelievable.
Straight. A project and a journey so monumental that 99% of the world told me it was simply impossible. There are no gold medals, no cheering crowds, no big winners' paychecks for what I've done, even though this project managed to set multiple world records and change the lives of millions of little kids in South Africa. See, it's not what I did that's so monumental. It's why I did it that makes the story so powerful and so unique. You see, I believe that when you are driven by passion and powered by a purpose greater than yourself to be able to give back and to help others, it'll help you overcome any obstacle, any challenge, and even help you achieve the seemingly impossible. I think sometimes when you want to understand someone, how they got to where they are, either you get to watch the movie like you just did, or you get to hear the story about my late great father with a cheeky grin and a heart of gold, my late great dad, Mr. Bertish, who, as you saw in the film, taught me everything about the ocean from a really early age. I was sailing with him on the first ever catamaran that he built in South Africa at the age of 3 years old. I was water skiing at 5 years old, windsurfing at 7, and surfing by the age of 10 years old. And it helped me in all the things that I've done in my life because the ocean became my second home. And I was very fortunate to grow up as the youngest of 3 naughty little boys. And I was very lucky for when I say that because I was the youngest, I was always trying to keep up with my older brothers, and they were fearless little watermen themselves. So in order to keep up with them, it made me really tough, really resilient, and really determined. Because if I didn't keep up with them, I literally got left behind. But I never realized how valuable those characteristics were in other areas of my life going forward and how that helped me in everything that I've done in my life. And I think a lot of people, what they know me for is this, surfing waves the size of sort of 4-story buildings and being able to be out in this environment which is deadly and volatile and constantly changing. It taught me to become incredibly flexible, adaptable, and be able to embrace change and face my fears. But not only face them, but embrace them and move through them, because I realized by surfing these kind of waves and facing my fears and moving into the unknown that that's where the magic happens and that's where your greatest potential lies, just past your comfort zone. But it was only in 2010 when winning that absolutely monumental event at Mavericks that I realized that when you really set your mind on something and you stay persistent and you never give up, you can pretty much achieve anything. But by facing my fears in the ocean, I realized that I wasn't facing my fears on land in the same way. So I took that philosophy in the ocean and I applied it to every single thing that I did in my life on land. And hence the reason why I now speak around the world for a living. And public speaking, like most of you and sitting in the audience, was my greatest fear. But it was only when I got into the sport of stand-up paddleboarding, just after the Mavericks event, where I really started realizing the potential of this new sport. And even though with big wave surfing I was able to inspire people with my incredible story, when I got into stand-up paddleboarding and did the long-distance open ocean records and the 12-hour record, the 24-hour Guinness World Record non-stop, and I started attaching these other charities to my journeys, I realized that I could not only inspire people with my journey, but I could actually directly impact on other little kids' lives. And that really struck a chord for me. And as soon as I realized I could do that, then I wanted to just go bigger. And I ended up starting to plan doing a 7-day open ocean adventure, which had never been done at the time in 2014, up the most rugged west coast of southern Africa, from Cape Point, which is the Cape of Storms, all the way to Lambert's Bay, over 220 miles by myself, completely unsupported on my solo stand-up paddleboard, 17-foot long SIC. And I strapped all my equipment on, all my food, all my water, all my hydration, all my technical gear, my solar panels, and all my communication devices, and I set off from Cape Point to a really rude awakening within the first couple of days, because the elements were so wild. Within the first couple of days, I got followed by sharks, I got shipwrecked up the coastline on through massive seas, I lost half my equipment, I almost got blown out to sea between Robben Island and Dasson Island, which is about 50 miles offshore, and I got so close to getting blown right out to sea in between the two islands when the wind picked up completely unforecasted, that I had to paddle 7 hours on one side without changing my stroke before I thought I was going to miss the island. And it was by 4 o'clock that afternoon when I was just trying to keep my angle without missing that island, because I knew the closest form of land, if I missed that island, was Brazil, which was about 5,000 miles away. And it was after the World Cup, so there was no point in going there. So I knew that I had to get that island before sundown. And when I got to the island, I was so dehydrated and sunburnt and sunstroked that I actually passed out face first on the sand for 5 hours. I woke up in the middle of the night, blisters all over my hands. I'd burnt my corneas so badly that I couldn't even see straight. And I woke up the next morning after having about 4 hours sleep, and I had to still paddle out another 100 miles to get to Lambert's Bay. I got lost in the fog, even though my GPSs were going to take me in the wrong direction. I ended up getting channeled and guided in by a pod of humpback whales through the mist, which was one of the most incredible experiences. And much to everybody's shock and horror, I actually finished at Lambert's Bay 7 days later. But what it taught me through that adventure was that I'd actually raised a whole lot more money than I thought, and I'd raised enough money to be able to pay for 5 operations for kids born with cleft palates and cleft lips, and it paid for almost 1,000 kids to get fed through the lunchbox fund. And that really was quite an eye-opener for me. But I also realized that the elements are so wild and so volatile and dangerous that I needed to find a way to be able to get out of the sun and get out of the salt water in order to survive these kind of adventures that I was planning on doing. But what I realized from that journey was that 220 miles was exactly 5% of the distance of a full transatlantic crossing. So I thought, well, if I could build the right craft, that I could take all my own food and enough water or water maker that could transfer via reverse osmosis the salt water into fresh water, and I could take it off all my gear, and I could build a little cabin to be able to get out of the elements during the peak times in the day, then I could not only do 220 miles, but I could do maybe 4,000, and I could raise millions for charity and change the lives of millions of little kids. So that's what I decided to do. So for the next 3 years, I spent just working full-time, feverishly trying to design and build this craft, which was designed and built for one purpose and one goal, and to be able to get me across the Atlantic Ocean in one piece with one single paddle. And I remember spending so much time designing it and doing all the design changes in the United Kingdom where we built this craft, and it was called the Ippy Fish. It was exactly 2 foot longer than my normal open ocean 17-foot board. It was almost twice as wide, and it had a little cabin in the front, all powered by solar, all my electronics inside, chart plotter, GPS, sat nav, radar, reverse osmosis, water maker, radio, little sound system, a VHF radio, and every single backup of a backup of a backup of every single main system. Because I've learned in the ocean, you got to come prepared for anything. Plan for the worst and hope for the best. And we did the last final checks, and to be able to turn the craft over with me inside it when I locked myself in a little cabin to ensure that if it turned over in the ocean, which I knew it wasn't going to be if, it was just going to be when and how many times, then I knew that it was going to right itself automatically and it wasn't going to leak and I wasn't going to sink. So once I got all that done, then I remember flying back to South Africa, and as I was flying over the corner of Morocco over here on the way home, I remember looking out at this vast ocean and just thinking to myself how immense this project, what I was doing, was, how enormous it was. And when you can look at your route from outer space on Google Earth and see your route, it's pretty monumental, and it's quite humbling. And I think the only thing that gave me any sort of comfort was that it was in the shape of a little smile, which was the reason why I was doing it. So it sort of gave me quite a sense of purpose. But I think it wasn't as much as when I left, just before leaving to go to Morocco to meet the craft, which was going to get exported from the UK to Morocco to meet me. I flew up to a place called Bloemfontein in South Africa, where they're doing Operation Smile 50-year anniversary, where they're doing 50 operations in 3 days. And it was such a monumental day on so many levels for me. And I never realized how valuable and how powerful that day was going to be to be able to help me get through my most difficult times along the journey. Because when I dressed up in the doctor's scrubs that day, and I spent the whole day there watching these surgeons that were putting these little kids' faces back together, it was such a powerful experience. Because in our country, people have nothing. And the kind of people that are bringing their kids here to be able to have surgery, they can barely put food on the table, let alone pay for operations. So this was their only chance to get their little kids' faces put back together. And some of the mothers that were there that day, it was so humbling, because some of them had spent between 3 and 5 days walking, sleeping in bus shelters, doing whatever it would take to be able to get their child to that operation that day. And you think it just affects that one little child. No, it affects their whole family, because their family gets shunned and taken out of communities because they look disfigured and they're not able to suckle, they're not able to mix with other kids. So when you see these little operations that take 45 minutes and cost less than $400, it's so humbling when you see the emotion of the mothers when they get their little child back with their little face put back together and they can actually have a normal life. It was the most powerful, most emotional, and emotionally charging experience that I've ever experienced before. And it made me so passionate about my purpose of why I was doing this, that I never realized at the time, but that was going to help me get through the most difficult, most greatest obstacles on my journey. And there's a great little line and quote by Patanjali that sums up what happens when you're truly inspired by your purpose. And you'll like it, because it goes like this. When you are inspired by some incredible project, some extraordinary purpose, all your thoughts break their bonds. Your mind transcends limitations. Your consciousness expands in every direction. And you find yourself suddenly in a new and wonderful world that you never realized existed. Dormant forces, faculties, and talents that were never available to you before suddenly come alive. And you find yourself to be a greater person by far than you ever imagined yourself to be. That is what happens when you're truly inspired by something. And I was so inspired when I finished this journey that I flew out and went to go and meet the Impi fish, which was meant to be arriving like 2 weeks before I even got there. But by the time I got there, it was still missing on some ship that it was meant to be on. Then it would miss the next ship, and it was like 3 weeks later. I was still trying to get it out of customs. I nearly had to marry one of the official's daughters, and then I almost had to buy a camel and everything you can possibly imagine to try and get this craft of mine, which you can see the size of it. It's really small in comparison. And when you think you're going to be able to spend, 3 months in that thing in the middle of the ocean, it's quite daunting. And I remember getting the craft into the water, and I was already running out of my visa. I'd only had a week left, and I was meant to start, and then the only thing we were missing was all the very meticulous freeze-dried food, which I'd planned for my entire journey over 9 different types of meals across, all different days, so you can mix it up all nicely. And we were waiting for it, and then we realized that 5 days before I was about to begin, and my visa was going to run out, that the company actually went bankrupt. And I wasn't going to get any of my freeze-dried food. And we had to try and get my team to try and find other similar product, which we couldn't really get at last minute in such a rush. So my team ended up sending me this other product, which was very similar, but I only realized when I was packing it into the craft all 180 of the bags were actually all the same. And not one of them I would have chosen. It was the same packet. And then in that week before I was about to leave, after packing all my stuff and getting everything ready, I was trying to look for the right weather window, and we just got hit by the biggest storm the whole area had ever been hit by over that period, and there was no way I could leave. We ran out of money for the project, so my whole team had to fly home. I was left there by myself, and trying to get another visa, which was a nightmare. I spent 2 days almost getting put in jail, and then I got told they'd give me 1 extra week, and if I didn't leave by the end of that week, they would put me in jail, which is always good incentive to leave, but not really ideal, and the weather window wasn't great in the last week, but I knew I had to go, and on the last day, even though the conditions weren't right, I remember prepping everything and trying to get everything cleared through customs and immigration until 2:30 that morning. And they wouldn't stop hassling me until almost 3 o'clock. I had an hour and a half sleep, and I woke up and I left from that dock in Agadir on the 6th of December last year, completely alone, into the pitch black. No cheering crowds, no farewell crew, no team wishing you goodbye, alone, into the abyss. And I tell you what, it was the most terrifying moment, paddling out that harbour. But because the obstacles were so great, when I actually got out of the harbour, I felt like I'd actually won and crossed the Atlantic just starting. And I tell you what, once I took that first paddle, I got outside of the harbour and I took that stroke. I was all in, no matter what. There was never going to be any turning back, never giving up, giving in. I was all in, at whatever cost. Because I had so many people relying on me, and so many little kids on my shoulders that I was only going to get off on the other side, no matter what it took. And when I paddled out there, I thought I'd prepared for everything. I'd got a backup of a backup of a backup, and I'd done all my preparation, my training, I'd done everything. But little did I know how unprepared I really was for what was about to happen. Because in that first week, everything you could possibly imagine could go wrong, went wrong, and a whole lot more. My battery banks on my solar stopped working. My steering packed up with my autopilot. My systems went down. My one steering system broke. My compass and compass light broke, so I couldn't see at night at all. And at night, even when I stopped paddling to try and rest, even though I was paddling between 12 and 15 hours a day, I realized there was a current that was actually taking me back on land. So the only way I could eradicate that was to be able to increase the amount of hours that I was paddling during the day and during the night. So I increased it up to 20 hours a day. And even though I'd taped every single one of my fingers like a boxer and then had gloves over that, I was still getting blisters right through my gloves, all over my hands. And I finally fixed most of the stuff and brought it down to like a bare bones structure to be able to get through what I needed to fix it, implemented a new steering system. And I thought I'd sort of figured out everything. And then just off the Canaries, once I thought I'd figured out and sorted out the water maker bleeding the system to be able to make it work again, that's when I got hit by probably one of the biggest storms of my entire journey. And a lot of people ask me, what is it like out there in that world when you're alone and everything around you feels like it's trying to kill you? Well, let me describe to you 24 hours in my world. So this is about 10 o'clock in the morning. I'm already on my second 3-hour shift of the morning. This wave that you see over here breaking is about 7 to 9 feet, and the wind's blowing at about 25 knots. I'm standing on a craft which is this wide, and the waves breaking all around me. It's like standing on a giant yoga ball, and it's trying to throw you off all the time, and you're standing upright with a single-bladed paddle, and everything around you is trying to knock you off. By the time I got to about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I'd been paddling for over 10 hours already, more than a full marathon. The wind had increased to about 35 to just under 40 knots. The sea state had increased to 5 meters, which is about half the size of this room, and it started to get pretty woolly. By the time I got to sort of 6:30 in the evening, these waves that you see were breaking are over 20 feet high. And the top half of them are breaking, which is absolutely terrifying. And the wind had increased to over 40 knots, which is one down from a full-blown hurricane and just over a gale. I'm still paddling. Now I've been paddling for equivalent of a full Ironman. And by the time I got to just after dark, I got hit by waves that I couldn't even see coming because it was pitch black. Got knocked completely off the craft, and rolled underneath the craft and over it, connected to my safety gear. I got onto my deck and realized it was too dangerous to be out on deck, so I put out what's called a giant parachute anchor, which looks like a giant parachute, which is attached to the front of the craft, which holds you sort of head into the wind to stabilize yourself, and you drag with the wind and the conditions, but it slows you down. And when I get into my little cabin, it's about 9:30 at night, I'm completely exhausted physically and mentally, and I'm just trying to get through the next hour, and then I'm so famished because I need to obviously eat now, so I'm making my freeze-dried food, the same one that I've had for many days in a row, on an open flame with boiling hot water in a cabin that's the size of my shoulders that I'm not even able to sit upright in. And every wave that hits the side of the craft almost semi-inverts the craft, so it feels like the craft's going to turn upside down. And when a wave hits the side of the craft, which happens every 5 to 7 minutes, it sounds like the craft is going to disintegrate around you every 5 minutes. I then have my little meal without burning myself, and then try and send out a captain's log message to the world about weathering the storms of life and seeing the opportunity in the obstacle, as I'm literally just trying to stay alive and trying to still be inspirational to the world out there about how to get through obstacles and stay positive in life. But I'm so exhausted that I actually literally fall asleep while I'm typing my message, but it doesn't take long before I get knocked awake by the next wave that hits the side of the craft because it's so loud. I then do an update with my weather forecaster because I heard that the weather was obviously meant to be getting better because it's not really able to get any worse. And then he tells me that actually the weather was just about to get even worse. So now I'm trying to process that information because I don't think it's possible for the weather to get worse around me. And I sort of drift off to sleep for about, 7 to 9 minutes at a time because that's all you get. And then suddenly I start feeling this weird sense of the craft getting pulled in like a very jerky manner. And then I start looking through my little cabin and I see sheets of water going over the bow of the craft. Like almost like somebody's trying to pull me down through the waves. And I'm so exhausted that I think this doesn't make any sense to me. So I'm trying to make sense of what's happening. And as I think, okay, maybe it's just normal, that I'm just getting the angle of the parachute anchor just feels strange. And then I get pulled almost directly down through the top of a 6 to 8 meter wave. And I just see sheets of water going over the top of the craft again. I'm like, okay, now I know something dramatic is wrong. I look at my charts, maybe I'm caught on the bottom. No, it's like 1,000 fathoms deep, so that's clearly not the problem. I look to see maybe I'm caught on fishing nets or something else. No, there's no fishing trawlers in this area. I look outside, maybe, no, not caught on anything. So then I narrow it down, I think to myself, okay, what else could it possibly be? And then I start looking at my chart plotter, which tells me the direction that I'm traveling and the speed that I'm traveling in. Then it makes horrible sense, but it's so far-fetched and out of this world that I actually can't quite contemplate what I'm actually seeing. Because when something tells you, your instruments tell you you're getting dragged forward into 45 knots of wind and 6 to 8 meter waves, you know that something's really, really problematic. So I send a message to my routing agent in Scotland, Mr. Levin Brown, who's done numerous transatlantic crossings. And I say to him, listen, my friend, this is what's happening. I'm in the middle of the storm. This is what's happening. I feel like I'm stuck on something, but I'm actually getting pulled into these conditions, and it makes no sense. I've narrowed it down that it can only be one or two things. But it's so far-fetched that I need you to actually confirm what I'm thinking, because it's not this, it's not this, it's not this, it's not this. And about 4 minutes later on the satellite phone, I get back the most terrifying text you've ever seen or heard of in your entire life. And it goes like this. Chris, you're either caught on a giant whale or a giant squid that's in your parachute anchor trying to take you down to the bottom of the ocean. I suggest you take immediate evasive action before you get pulled down with you and your craft in it. I prepared for pretty much everything on this journey, but I really hadn't prepared to have the kraken stuck in my parachute anchor that was trying to take me down to the bottom of the ocean. There was no manual that said anything about having the kraken stuck in your parachute anchor. So I tried to quickly get into my gear because I knew I had to sort this out really quickly before I, maybe got pulled down underneath the ocean with this guy. And, if I could have trained him to be able to pull me in the right direction or, harvesting for calamari, it would have been great. But this guy had a serious problem and he was trying to take me down with him. So I got into all my gear, jumped outside, and took my knife and tried to cut the line because there are two lines. One's connected to the head of the parachute anchor, the other one's connected to the craft. And as I cut the one line, there was so much load on the line that when I cut the line, the craft suddenly spun completely upside down with me attached to it. I got taken off the craft. This is in the middle of the storm at night. Just remember this, okay? And it rolled right over the craft and over the back of the craft and then up onto the deck. And I was like hanging on the side, hoping that I wasn't going to get pulled down with this creature. Eventually got up onto the deck. Obviously, I'm a little bit shaken and stirred, like a little bit like a martini, and get onto the deck and realize that the tension on the line had gone, and obviously it had opened up the mouth of the parachute anchor and released the beast back into the ocean. And everything sort of went back to normal. Stuck in the middle of the ocean, still in a giant storm in the middle of the night, on a craft the size of a normal stand-up paddleboard. Anyway, I was just trying to get through the night, and it was such an incredibly testing night already. And by about 4 o'clock in the morning, the craft kept on getting inverted sideways for some unknown reason. And I realized that what maybe had happened is one of the lines had got caught underneath around the centerboard, and that's why I was getting pulled sideways. But I was so exhausted and so fatigued, and it was so dangerous to be outside, I just knew I was going to wait until morning. So at 5 o'clock in the morning, as soon as I got a little bit of daylight, I got out of all my gear and I got into my board shorts. I put my big wave leash around my ankle, and I went outside, and it was still crazy volatile conditions outside. And I realized that the line had actually got caught underneath, so the only way I was going to be able to get it off is to dive underneath the craft in the middle of the storm and then try to cut the line off with my knife. So I dived underneath with my big wave leash still attached, and as I put my knife in between the centerboard and the line, the craft above the water, because I was underneath it, got hit by a wave and suddenly took off and started surfing. And I suddenly, my hand went through in between the line and got caught, and I pulled almost my shoulder out of its socket, and I suddenly get dragged like 50 meters under the water at about 30 kilometers an hour underneath the water attached to the craft. And I was trying to wiggle my way out to try and get the knife to be able to catch the corner of the line. And as it did, it caught the line, but it went in between my fingers, and I just heard the sound going, and that was the line cutting right through my finger. And when you hear that sound underneath the water, it is the most horrendous sound you can possibly imagine. And then the line got separated, and I got dragged backwards by my leash underneath the water for about 50 meters until I came back up. And I remember being so concerned because that sound was so terrifying that I didn't even want to look down at my hand, because I actually thought my finger had been ripped off. And I remember getting up and putting my hands on the side of the craft and looking down, and my finger was still attached, even though I was bleeding everywhere. I could feel myself going into shock, and I got up onto the craft and got into my little cabin, tried to wipe away all the blood, took my gloves off, and then wiped away all the blood, and I finally started looking at it. It had actually gone down to just above where the bone was on both sides, but I knew it wasn't bad enough, and I could actually nurse it back to health if I kept it dry every sort of 3 hours. I had to dry it and clean it. But I was very fortunate, because I never realized at the time that in the 3.5 weeks that I'd already been out there, I hadn't actually taken my gloves off once. And if I hadn't had my gloves on and had taped up every single one of my fingers, I probably would have lost my finger. And this was just 6 o'clock in the morning. And while I was up on deck, just before I thought I was going to lose my finger, I realized that a wave during the night had hit my steering system so badly that it actually ripped my whole steering system right off my craft. So now I had no steering, almost lost my finger, and ladies and gentlemen, welcome to exactly 19 hours that I've just described to you, of 93 days. And just when I thought of getting my finger put back together and trying to figure out in my head how I was going to implement my third backup steering system, that's when I got pushed into the shipping lanes. A lot of people ask me, what was it like? Did I see any ships out there? Okay, well this might look like a very strange looking picture for you, but I'm going to put it in perspective quite quickly. Okay, so this is me on the MP face, this little black craft that comes up on the radar because I have like a magnifier which makes me look 5 times bigger than I actually am because I'm so little. And then every single one of these funny little blue objects that are within between 300 meters of me and 3 kilometers are super tankers, which are about 1.2 kilometers long and about 17 times as wide as this cinema. And the problem with that is that when you see them bearing down at you and you call them on the VHF radio and you tell them to please alter their course because you're an insignificant little empty fish stand-up paddleboard craft, and they don't respond, you know that you won't even be a tremor in their coffee cup on the bridge deck if they ran you down. And that's quite an insignificant feeling when you're in the middle of the ocean alone. And you think that that's terrifying in the daytime. At night, oh my gosh, is it scary. Because every single one of them looks like they're going to run you down, and you're not actually sure the exact angle that they're coming at you at. And people ask me, how stressful is it? Okay, well, let's put it in perspective. Okay, so this is a 3-hour period in the middle of the night where every single one of these spikes is when I thought a separate supertanker was going to run me down, and my heart rate went up to 208. Which, if you speak to most people that are in physiology, will tell you is one down from a full-blown cardiac arrest. So yes, ladies and gentlemen, it was reasonably stressful. I managed to get through past the Canary Islands, and I was just celebrating that I actually survived and got past. And I was going to have my first morning to celebrate. It was Christmas Day that I'd actually survived, and I was now into open ocean. And as I was about to celebrate at about 10 o'clock in the morning, I realized that the craft was listing to one side, and I actually had a giant leak, and I was sinking. That one day I was going to celebrate on Christmas. And I started to get into a real state of, quite a negative state of despair, because, I had been through quite an emotional 3.5 weeks already. And I was sitting there pumping out all the water. I managed to get half of it out and trying to figure out where this leak was coming from. And I was thinking of, all you guys sitting having your Christmas breakfast with all your friends and family, celebrating, drinking champagne and orange juice and eating roast duck and turkey. And I was thinking to myself, what a really stupid idea it was to try and paddle across the Atlantic Ocean. And then I remember, picking up my freeze-dried food packet because I was so hungry, and I was thinking, oh no. And then as soon as my eyes would read the food packet, I'd lose my appetite, because your body's going, there's no way you're putting that thing back in here again. And I started to get really down and, getting all negative, and then I had to actually stop myself and go, hey, hold on a second. The kids we're doing this for, a lot of them haven't even had dinner the night before, or lunch the next day. And the little kids that we're doing it for are deformed in more ways than I can imagine. You know what? So shut up, suck it up, and change your attitude. Have a little bit of an attitude of gratitude for things you do have, not the things you don't have. And it was interesting because I just decided in that moment that I wasn't going to complain anymore. I had arms and legs that still worked. I had a mouth that worked. I had food, even though it wasn't the stuff that I wanted to eat. And I needed to change my attitude and change my outcome. So I adopted a whole new attitude that morning, because I thought of all the things that I actually did have. Because in the ocean, things can be worse. A lot worse. All the time. So just celebrate that you're actually alive. So I put on a little smile on my face. I went out and put some old school in excess on my sound system. I put on my little Christmas hat. And I went out there and I changed my attitude and I changed my outcome. And I decided to adopt an attitude of gratitude. And it ended up being actually one of my best days that I had on my entire journey. And I adopted a whole new philosophy that went, shut up. Suck it up, get up, stand up, take action, be the change you want to see in the world. And I apply that to every single day from that point onwards. And don't focus on the end goal, because sometimes it's just insurmountable. Just focus on what's in front of you. One stroke at a time, 1 hour at a time, 1 shift at a time, for as long as it takes. And I focused on that, and by the end of the day I was celebrating so much and having such a good time that I even invented my own version of aero pedal guitar. I play a mean paddle guitar in the middle of the Atlantic. And I remember getting through this day, and the wind in the late afternoon ended up dying down quite a bit. And I remember almost celebrating my new found belief in myself and my new attitude. I was very proud of myself, and I sent out a message on Facebook that went, I've got through everything, every storm. I've almost been dragged out by giant squids. I've got through everything the ocean can possibly throw at me. If I can get through the last month, I can get through anything. Send. Biggest mistake of my entire journey, because that's when this guy came to greet me. And ladies and gentlemen, when you see a head coming out of the water at speed that is so big and so aggressive, and it comes up so quickly that everything goes into slow motion that you're not even able to react quick enough, because this thing came up so fast that when it hit the side of the craft, it knocked the craft off balance this way, but I started falling this way. And I remember looking down as this giant head started coming out of the water with this big black eye, and thought to myself, if he opens his mouth right now, I'm just going to fall into it. So I need to change something really quickly before I have a really bad ending. I remember trying to grab something out with my other hand and grabbed a little rope which caught me back on balance, and his head came out of the water and then went back down. And as it went underneath the water, he swam underneath me. And that's when I realized how wide he was. And when the shark that's trying to eat you is wider than your craft and a lot longer, it makes you feel very insignificant in the middle of the ocean when you realize how alone you really are. And when this thing swam away, it turned around about 50 meters away and came straight back at me. And this guy was like coming at me like a torpedo. And when you see a shark in that aggressive state, it is absolutely terrifying. When you are lunch. And he got to about exactly where this fair young maiden is in the pink top. I wish the shark was pink, it would have made it look less dramatic. And as he got to about right here, he swished aggressively to the side and splashed all the water up in my face, and I actually thought he was going to attack the craft. But I was already standing there with my knife in my hand, ready to go into battle, because it's like you go into this fight or flight state, except for there's no flight, because there's nowhere for you to go, and he ain't going anywhere. But it's like he's come to actually attack you, and you defend your home and yourself with whatever means necessary. And as he swam away, I thought he was going to come back and attack the craft again, but he didn't. But it took me about half an hour before I actually put that knife down and stopped shaking, because I was so terrified. I wasn't sure if it was because of my colored board shorts or my sea pirate looking beard that scared him off, but thank goodness he didn't come back. So I was pretty much prepared for that, but I wasn't prepared for what happened exactly 1 week later. 4:57 in the morning. I remember that time. I don't know why, it just resonated with me. I'm lying in my tiny little cabin, literally around my head like this. My ear is never more than about 8 inches from the side of the craft, because that's how small it is. And it's only less than an inch thick. Believe me, it doesn't feel very thick when something's out there. And it's like being in this giant boombox, because every single sound is accentuated tenfold. And when you're lying in that state of semi-sleep, not sleep ever, and then you hear the sound outside, it will make your skin turn. When you hear a sound that goes, bah! Down the side of the craft. Just in case you're not sure what that is. That's the sound of a very large, aggressive, hungry, great white shark bumping up against the side of your craft and then scraping down the side. Now you might ask yourself, why would a shark do that? Well, most people know that sharks have got that very coarse, sandpaper-like skin, yes? Yes. The reason why they have that sandy kind of skin is because they keep all their sensory receptors in their skin. So when he bumps up against the side and he scrapes down it like that, what he's actually trying to do is he's just trying to taste you. Which is not a good thing. I'm not going to hold my breath for a very long time, but I didn't really have to hold it for that much longer before it happened again. But I think every single person that's sitting in this audience has some time in their life have had an experience where you're lying in bed in the dark, alone at night, and you hear a scary sound, and you think to yourself, maybe if I just lie really still and don't move and don't breathe, it'll just go away, yes? Yes. Wrong. Bah! Second time round. Now the bad news about that is that I know sharks very well. So if the first time he bumps and grinds down the side, that's really bad news for you. But if it happens the second time, that means that I liked what I tasted the first time. So I'm just coming back to do one last check before I go up. And the kind of shark that's going to take a bite out of you is so big and so aggressive that I built my little MP Fish craft So it had watertight compartments, so if I got a leak in one side, it wouldn't flood all of them and I wouldn't sink. But the kind of shark we're talking about, if it took one big bite of my craft, I would flood all my watertight compartments and I would probably sink in about 4.5 minutes. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the most terrifying realization when you are thousands of miles in the middle of nowhere, in the pitch black. So I tried to really process that information really quickly, but there was nothing I could do, so I just literally lied there and hoped that it would go away. And thank goodness he didn't come back the second time, or the third time. And he didn't come back, but it was a horrible realization that the first time wasn't by chance, the second time was lightning doesn't strike twice, so that means that the third time was very likely and the outcome wasn't probably going to be very positive, which really messed with my brain, and I had to learn ways to be able to distract my mind, to be able to keep myself positive through the constantly life-threatening obstacles that came fast and furious almost every single day. And I had to really try and make light of anything that could keep me positive through my journey, because it was so testing on a daily basis. But I was very fortunate that the next day, one of the greatest companions came to greet me. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Mr. Wings, the flying fish. Mr. Wings, during the night, got his landing strip wrong and landed up on my craft. And when I woke up in the morning and I got up on my first hour shift, there was Mr. Wings sitting on my deck. Unfortunately for Wings, he was already dead, but that made no difference to me because he gave me so much satisfaction. I pulled out his little wings and made him fly around like an airplane for like an hour or two. Then, I got quite bored, so I put him in my waist pocket of my board shorts and I paddled with him for an hour or two. And then I got even more bored, so I duct taped him to my head and made him fly around while I was paddling. And then late afternoon, I got really hungry, so I ate it. I don't know why you think that's funny. When you've been reading the same freeze-dried food packet for the last 50 days, believe me, he was the tastiest little morsel and treat I'd had on my entire journey. But the interesting thing was, he made me so happy. I was so excited with that flying fish because he made me smile. He made me so happy that day that I made a pact to the flying fish as I chomped on him, because he gave me so much joy, that every time I was going to see a flying fish, I was going to go, flying fish, and then smile. And it would always give me and bring me back into a more positive and happy state. And even though I had to force it most of the time, and the problem was that I didn't realize how many flying fish that I was actually going to see from that point onwards, I kept that pact to myself and to the flying fish, and it kept me positive on my entire journey, even though I had to force myself to smile every single time I saw it. But it helped me realize that you've got to celebrate your little victories and to be able to keep you positive through difficult times. And a lot of people ask me, what did I see out there? What kind of creatures? Well, ladies and gents, I saw everything you could possibly imagine. And this pot of dolphins, I didn't realize it at the time, but in the first 3 weeks when I was in my most stressed and anxious and fearful state, this same pot of dolphins came to visit me every single day for 23 days in a row. And I never realized it at the time, but dolphins are so intuitive that they can sense your emotions and your stress. And they actually came to come and check in on me and make me realize that I wasn't alone. And when you can interact with creatures on that sort of level, it's quite a remarkable experience to be able to be in that state.